Hey folks, welcome. How are you doing? Welcome.
Hello.
Hi Astrid. So good to see you.
Yeah, so nice I could make it. I'm
Mm.
always busy on Tuesdays because lunch of learn.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So
And I appreciated your message the other day. It was very helpful. Thank you.
yeah.
Hey Rob, long time no see.
Yeah. Hey, how are you?
Hope you're doing great. Yeah, I'm doing all right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And hey Paul, hey William, hey Jennifer. Fancy
Actually, I
meeting
was
you
on some
here.
other call with Jabe last week too. So seeing
Ooh,
all the old gang.
get the gang back together. Gonna go hide in a hotel lobby for a bit, like the old days. That was before I really understood co-working spaces. I was just like, it's just a place where we all are. That's great. Hey, folks. Well, welcome to this event. I see a bunch of people are still joining. I really appreciate you taking the time to spend your afternoon, or morning, or late evening, depending on where you are in the world, with me. And I'm just grateful that you're here. What I'm going to do here is share some slides with you all so we can kind of be on the same page here. And I'm going to work on getting that going here. And we're going to start with a warm-up exercise. I mean, the way I like to run these events, they're pretty conversational. And of course, nobody joins these meetings on time. That's just how this stuff works, right? So I'm not going to sweat it. And let me see here if I can get things lined up here. All right. Pleased to be fitting in the window. Awesome. And I'll just make this a little bit easier to see. Great. Okay. So we're gonna get started here with a little warm up, and I have no idea if this is gonna be fun or not, but one of the things I'm always interested in trying to get people to connect with each other rather than having to always go through like one person. I'd much rather explore the value that's in all of your heads and connect you all together than always be the person at the center of it. So to give us a rallying point for both before and after the event. There's a LinkedIn post that I made. It's just pretty brief. Hey, this is a networking post. And what I'd like to invite you to do is reply to that post with the challenge that you're working on right now, the one that you think Wardley Maps might help with. And when you do that, and when other people do that, the joy of this is you'll be able to see what other challenges people have and find each other. And if you have similar challenges or if something resonates, or if you're in a similar kind of moment of where you are in your Wardley Maps journey, this will give you a place to connect with each other and find each other after the call or during the call, even. So I posted a link in the chat and hopefully everyone can see it. And just so you see what's going on here, here's a quick impression of what the post is. And so the activity here for the warm up while we wait for people to join and the dead space here in the next couple minutes, grab the link to this post, which is in the chat, and reply with the challenge that you're working on so that you can find other folks with similar challenges and connect with them after the call. And so again, this might be the challenge that you're thinking Wardley Maps might help you with. And we'll kind of use that as sort of the center of our discussion. I'll refresh here every once in a while just to see if we have some posts. We've got a couple down here. So good. Yeah, Jennifer, would you be willing to share a few words about what you're working on with connecting strategy to outcomes?
Yeah, we're implementing safe. Well, we've decided to implement safe in our organization, and we have for lots of reasons, and trying to understand how to connect the strategy to the value streams to delivery and understanding where we have bottlenecks and where the people are that we're serving and how to take that all the way through to metrics to tell us if we're performing well or not. That's the big problem we're trying to solve.
Mm.
And I keep looking at the Wardley mapping things that you and David put out, and I keep thinking, there's something in here. My brain just keeps lighting up, but I can't quite figure it out. So I'm hoping maybe today will be the day.
Awesome. Yeah. I think Rob, when Rob and I were working together, I think that might have been around the time when we met Michelle Guthrie. I think we call her DevOps grandma a little bit. And she knows a lot about Safe, and we got to do some Wardley Map stuff with her and things like that. So awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Jennifer. So check out the comments on the post in the chat if you'd like to connect with folks like Jennifer. And there's also Paul Morgan here. You mentioned that you're dealing with an SDLC, software development process. Want to share a little bit about that? You don't have to if you don't want to. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So we're migrating from a legacy application to a more modern application. A lot of the knowledge is tied up in one particular individual's head. So what is the best, most efficient process to free up the development team from the one individual being a blocker? Because often for this one individual, it's quicker for him to do the work than it is to explain how to do the work. But if he takes that approach to everything, then the rest of the team can't join in and do any work. So what's another way of doing it? Can we use AI? Can we use pseudocode generated AI, pseudocode generated by AI from the existing code? What are the options there, in particular, climatic options and
Yeah.
really interesting sort of seeing how we can map that out. So I've got a colleague on the call here, and immediately after here, Ben, we're going to jump on and spend a couple of hours mapping instead of having a glass of wine, or maybe while having a glass of wine.
A little bit of both can help. That helps me for sure. Or at
It
least
is the evening over here, for everyone who's kind of
Fair
over in
enough.
America, it is the evening here. It's not 5 a.m.
Yeah, and the thing about mapping is it's not meant to be this like thing where you sit down and just suddenly have all the perfect thoughts, right? It's a way to think. It's a way to actually, like, writing is thinking, mapping is thinking, and you have to go around in cycles, especially with others, and kind of build on your thoughts and make them more and more smarter and better and all that fun stuff. And the blank page is the worst part. So yeah, glass of wine might help. Excellent. And I see Tristan. I have a thank you for Tristan. You're on the call. You sent me a message early this morning, and I found it inspiring for some changes that I made to today. So thank you for doing that, sir. And you're making a tool, is that right? A little bit of a conceit. I know you're making a map keep, but I wanted to give you a chance to share a little bit about that challenge if you'd like.
I'm building a brand new startup, so I've used the Wardley Mapping to figure out how to position the tool amongst other tools and what it's really competing against, etc. So that's my current challenge, is a 0 to 1 startup sort of thing.
Excellent. And just for those who may have just joined, we've got a link in the chat to a LinkedIn post where I've asked folks to share the challenges they're working on. And there are a bunch of responses here. I would encourage you to, after this call, read through those challenges, even now if you'd like, and find folks with similar challenges to you, connect with them. This is a little bit of like networking. And what I'd like to invite you to notice is the diversity of these challenges. They cover all sorts of kinds of things, right? Internal implementations to external competitive problems. And I just want you to notice and appreciate the difference, and also find some folks who are dealing with similar challenges to you. Thank you for taking part in that little experiment with me. And I'll make sure to link that at the end as well, so you can go back and find these folks and read through their challenges as well. All right, well done, everyone. So the intent for today, now that we're well on our way into the call, is to give you a little bit of an opinionated overview of Wardley Maps. So we'll see how much of it is endorsable by the likes of Simon Wardley and others. I suspect that those of you who are Wardley mapping experts who might have joined us today might have disagreements, and that's okay. Today is going to be, I'm going to try to create space for conversations and questions. So I would say that interruptions are actually super welcome. You can either just unmute when something happens and speak up, or you can type in chat. I'll be watching that. Or you can use the raise your hand feature in Zoom, and I'll call on you and we can have a quick sidebar on whatever it is that's come up for you. So interruptions are welcome. Do speak up. But since we've got 30 plus people on the call right now, I would just request that please be mindful to mute yourself when you're not speaking. It's a very helpful sort of thing for these large scale calls. After this experience today, I will send out a link to the recording. I will send out the slides, and I will also share all the important links that pop up throughout today. So that just to make sure that you have everything that you need and you get the most out of today's experience. Awesome. All right. Okie doke. It looks like we've got some annotation here, and I have no idea how to clear that. So we'll just keep moving.
Meat eater.
Sorry about that. Zoom is fun sometimes, but it can be a little bit tricky. Ooh, I think I found something. Oh, there it is. Hey, I learned something today. There's a little annotate button down below, so if you want to draw things on the screen for everyone, you can. Use with judicious, careful judgment, let's say. Today, what I'm going to share with you is a bit unorthodox. It is not going to be officially sanctioned in any way. And so I would encourage you to question everything that I say, but keep what works for you and discard the rest. You might have different opinions than me. You might discover different things than me about how Wardley mapping works and how it works for you specifically. So I want to create space for that. And above all, I would encourage you to read Simon Wardley's book for yourself. It's completely free. The link to that is in the chat. It's available in a variety of formats. And it is a bit of a heavy lift, but I promise you it's worth it. And if anything that you come across conflicts with what I say today, that's okay. I'm presenting a bit of an unorthodox take, and you can judge for yourself whether it's useful to you. All right, enough of the front matter. I want to see if this resonates. And Tristan, this is a little bit of the feedback you sent me this morning. Thank you. I wanted to focus on you a little bit here. And here's who I think you are, and maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. I think you are either a professional who's dealing with a complex work sort of situation, working in a complex sector, lots of moving parts. You have a specific internal challenge, and above all, you're trying to figure out how to use your scarce time, your scarce motivation, and effort, right? You're only one person, and you're doing your best to work with others, and you've got a challenge that you're working on. That's you, or I suspect you might also be a leader, a business leader, a government leader, a non-government organization leader, someone who's feeling the weight of responsibility for the choices that you make. And you're responsible for more than just you. You're responsible for teams, you're responsible for systems. And there's a specific existential market challenge that you're dealing with, or some specific internal obstacle, something really difficult about the way things are working internally. And you have to bring others with you along the way as you make decisions, as you figure things out. So those are the two kind of types of people that I'm imagining are on the call today. Above all, you both are dealing with an important situation. You both are dealing with a lot of moving parts. And you need to figure out what matters and then decide what to do. Now, I'm curious how right or wrong I am. Out of curiosity, if you're in the chat or if you just want to unmute real quick, does this fit you? Or does it not quite fit? Do you describe yourself a little differently? I just wanted to create a moment to check in with you all. I see in chat some say both apply. Yeah, I see a yes. Any no's? Anybody different?
So I'm a little bit different in that
Excellent.
I am in a situation where I am helping others come to grips with their complex circumstances.
Yes.
And so I've used Wardley maps in the past, and I want to kind of get a refresher and leverage them as a tool going forward so I can more quickly come up to speed and help them gain understanding kind of at the same time.
That's so awesome. Thank you, Quentin, because that definitely describes a third group that I left out here. And those of us who are in consulting world will feel kind of similarly. I see folks agreeing with you in the chat. And yes, if you find that you also don't agree and you're a fourth thing, please include that in the chat. I'd love to learn about that. And I see folks sharing all the way through. Thank you for that. So this is a little bit about you and who I think you are. And I'll turn it to me a little bit and just share who I am. My name is Ben. It's nice to meet you if we haven't met before. I've met a lot of you before, so I appreciate seeing you again. And I run a company called Hired Thought. And I've been Wardley mapping since about 2015. I was used to be in tech, do a lot of like systems administration, things like that. And then I found the people side of things way more fascinating and way more interesting, and so got into consulting. I run learnwardleymapping.com, which has courses and resources and things like that. And over 2,300 students have learned about Wardley mapping through the things that I've built. And I also co-authored a thing called a pip deck. It's called Strategy Tactics. Yes, the name is kind of silly. It was silly on purpose. But I co-authored this with my business partner and friend, David Holl. So those are some of the things that I've done. And Strategy Tactics is a bit of both Wardley maps and something called transition design. We worked both of those kinds of things into an alternative view of what kind of things we would like people to consider when they think about strategy. So that's a bit about me. And David and I love to work with teams, love to work with organizations. So if you ever want to work on a market problem or an internal strategy challenge, I just want you to know that you can always reach out to us. And even if you just have like questions about Wardley maps after today or anytime, you can always reach out to me here and I'll answer to you. So great. Astrid, I would love to hear from you.
Would you mind to pronounce your family name?
Oh, the company, my surname, or yeah, it's a fun one. It rhymes with composure. It makes no phonetic sense. It's Mosier,
Thank you.
which is a strange one. My father, who sometimes has a dubious account of the origins of our name, claims that the original was Mazirazovich, and I'm like, I don't think so. We're not that fancy. But Mosier is fun and difficult to pronounce.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Astrid. Okay, enough about me. Let's talk about Simon Wardley a little bit. So Simon Wardley invented this thing called Wardley Maps. This is a picture of him at the happiest I've seen him. This was at Map Camp Atlanta, which we organized at the Georgia Aquarium in 2019. I took this picture. There's just a bunch of tables of him surrounded by people who wanted to learn this mapping thing, and it just felt so right. He gives great hugs, and he loves to help people, and he loves to teach about this Wardley mapping thing. And the origin of Wardley mapping is a story of how he went from feeling like an imposter as a leader and thinking, surely there's a better way than the way that people do strategy today, to someone who at least feels like they've got traction on the long and unending process of figuring out what makes sense to do. And he has a story that he likes to tell. And he gives lots of talks about that story. And so one talk that I wanted to highlight is here at lwm.events/story. This will forward to a YouTube link to a talk that you might enjoy watching if you haven't heard Simon speak before. He's a great storyteller. And so there's nobody who can tell his story better than him. So I wanted to point you towards that. He invented this thing called Wardley Mapping. He released it Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike, which just means that anyone can build on it and modify it as long as they provide attribution and release it under the same license. So we get to play with it. And if I were to retell his story a little bit, I would say he was looking at all these buzzwordy, weird strategy documents that had things like customer-centric and quantum computing and 3D printers and 3D television and all the buzzwords, Internet of Things, apologies ahead of time, safe will save us, etc., like things like that. And he looks at the word salad in these documents and goes, well, is this all there is? Is this all there is to strategy? SWOT diagrams and buzzwords? And so that began a journey for him. And I'll sum up the journey in the shortest version possible. He analyzed everything he could. He read all the books that he could, and eventually wandered into a bookshop, and the bookshop owner sold him 2 copies of The Art of War. And I'm hesitant to always invoke The Art of War because there's a lot of like strategy bros who are going to be like, yeah, warfare, business, all that stuff. I'm not so interested in that. I'm interested in the philosophy behind it. And I neglected to include a link here, but there's a great book by Derek M.C. Wen, who is a Hong Kong-based scholar who specifically was trying to make The Art of War accessible to a Western audience. And his book is called Deciphering Sun Tzu. You can find it at various bookstore folks. Look for the one by Derek M.C. Yuen. It's got a black cover. And what he would say is that Sun Tzu and The Art of War and all this is barely, it hasn't even made it past the translation phase. We don't even have words for it in English. And that means that our understanding of it is severely impoverished. So with that kind of context, what I'll say is that's why Simon read multiple translations, because every translation kind of gets a little bit different right about it. And he was left with this question, like, what is the equivalent in business to the kinds of things that Sun Tzu is talking about in the book, in the Art of War? One of which is understanding the landscape that you're in. Like, and he went back to military history, looked at maps. It's like, wow, maps are really useful, and you can actually correlate outcomes of military battles to whether or not they were using maps to orient to the landscape, make plans, things like that. So what is the equivalent of that in business? Is there such a thing? And he looked far and wide, and as far as he could tell, there wasn't. And so he decided to make something. And just to kind of like position this in your head a little bit, like, what's a Wardley map good for? There's something called a sand table exercise, which is very useful in military contexts, but also like firefighting, where there's important things to know about where the fire is and where the residential areas are and things like that. But you try to make a picture or an interactive kind of thing to look at and consider from different angles and talk about together with and propose actions around. And just for your later kind of enjoyment, there's this really interesting book, or sorry, a really interesting like 4-minute video of some firefighters discussing around a sand table. And it just demonstrates, I think, very quickly the value of something like a Wardley map. Imagine the kinds of conversations you can have after watching this video that you could have about the business or about the context that you're working in. So that's just a little bit of framing. It's helpful to have something to point at. And so that's what Simon was looking for. And he made one. He made something. And he started with something called a value chain. And a value chain is just the who's, the what's, and the how's of the situation. Who's getting value? What are they getting? Like what benefits, what pain relief, etc. And then how are we going through producing those needs? How does the system meeting those needs? What all is in the picture there? And so just to kind of like explain less and do more, show more, I'd like to invite a few of you here to share with me, like, what kind of organization do you run? Do you run a coffee shop? Do you run a pharmaceutical? Are you in a pharmaceutical company? Where do you work? I'd like at least 3 examples, and we can go through real quick. Feel free to shout them out or type in chat. What kind of organization do you work at? I see academic publisher. And Jennifer, let's start there. Can you or really anyone else imagine someone who benefits from an academic publisher? Who benefits from an academic publisher? No wrong answers.
Yeah, the researcher certainly does, because their work is now out in the world. Those people that might benefit from the knowledge contained within that research to apply it to new things, those people benefit.
Love it.
Certainly the publisher does.
Yep.
Well, in traditional publishing models, there's enough money to keep the business afloat and employ people. So
Yep.
yeah, it's a pretty big ecosystem, really.
All that stuff it's there and it's worth diving into. And if we do just like kind of the slightest exploration here, focusing on those researchers, what's one thing they get? How do they benefit from this?
I mean, they get career advancement. That's the primary benefit, because they have, it's publish or perish for them. That's how they proceed to to get accolades. And why is that word escaping me? The one where they're employed forever and can't be fired.
Tenure.
There we go.
Yeah. I used to work for the state system of higher education in Pennsylvania, so
Yeah.
Familiar with academia. Yes, amazing. So I just want you all to notice what Jennifer is doing. She's articulating a perspective on what's happening in the situation inside the company. And then one more like quick question, like what kinds of things does the academic publisher need to be aware of that support this career advancement? This could be like the work that's done. These could be knowledge, collections of data, things like that.
Yeah, a big issue for us in the industry right now is whether the data is reliable and accurate, whether the research specifically is original and is has not been tampered with. Yeah.
Interesting. So
yeah.
there's a collection of data or collection of research data. I'm going to call it that for now.
Yeah.
And it sounds like there's work done to validate it. What would you call that?
Yeah. So I don't know why my words are just not flowing today, but essentially we have what's called paper mills. And you basically have people who are paying to have papers published in their name to help their careers, but the actual content is maybe doctored. And so that is a problem that we're trying to solve right now, so that publishers don't get caught in this cycle and then have a reputational hit as a result.
Okay. And here's like, I love that you shared that you're feeling like the words aren't flowing right now. Guess what? Like when you're doing this work, the words don't always flow. You don't always have the name for the thing. And so I'm just gonna roll with what you shared. Dealing with doctor data is a part of the business that, you know, has to happen. And so I just want to share with you real quick to everyone on the call, what we just did was we made a really quick value chain. And the way you read a value chain, you'll notice that it has connections between the things. Anytime you see a connection from top to bottom, just imagine the words depends on or needs. And then check to see if you can read it like a sentence from top to bottom. So the test here would be researchers depend on career advancement, or you could say researchers need career advancement. Is that true? Yeah, that sounds about right. Jennifer, would you agree?
Yep.
And then career advancement depends on this research data. And career advancement also depends on dealing with doctor data. Does that seem about right-ish?
Sure. Yeah.
And that sure is like the moment where like we could probably shift around some of these relationships. We could probably notice some things that are missing, all that stuff, right? So thanks for going through that with me, Jennifer. I want to do one or two more really quickly. And I'm going to see, Tristan, could I pick on you? Would you be willing to go through this with me?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you run and I saw you say a software as a service company, so SaaS. Who's going to benefit from your software as a service company?
Wardley Mappers.
Wardley Mappers. I guess you're on the right call then. And what's one benefit that they're going to get? Like, what are they going to get from your SaaS?
Collaborate with other people on Wardley Maps. So it's a live collaboration.
Live collaboration. Amazing. Okay. I love the words. These are good. And what's like one or two things like inside the context of your SaaS that you have to pay attention to or manage or make sure is working in order to make sure that live collaboration happens.
Right. It's typically called the multiplayer technology.
Okay, so some multiplayer technology. What else?
You get so it's multiplayer. You get user interface. For collaboration will be you can do things like chat, notification. Let's do notifications as well. That would be
Yeah,
enough.
yeah. Notifications. Yeah. And I like the word that you just, or the phrase you just said, that would be enough, right? When you're making maps, you're not trying to include the entire universe. You're trying to include only the things that are relevant to the conversation that you're trying to have right now, or the thinking that you're trying to do right now. And perhaps it would be not so relevant for you to talk about like servers or Amazon or what have you. It might be relevant though. And like you have to make that decision as you decide what to put in your value chain. Now, I just wanted to point out that we're doing like the super simple version of things, and like actual value chains look a little bit more complicated. And you might notice that in this example here, this image, there are things that depend on other things, and those things go all the way down, right? And so there's kind of this trick you can play where you go, okay, what else does this depend on? Is that all there is? Is there something else? And there's more to that story. And as Anna and Jennifer are talking in the chat, there's like all sorts of different things that you could add to the map or add to the value chain in this step right here to make it more right and more useful. But you don't have to get perfect. You're just trying to get some of your thinking out of your head so you can, one, share it with yourself and think with it, but two, maybe even share it with other people and see what they think, and they'll tell you what you're missing. So that's kind of the first part of making a Wardley map. I want to congratulate you all for joining with me on that. Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Tristan. And there's like one other weird chunk of things we need to learn in order to make that value chain actually turn into a Wardley map. And that thing is evolution. So evolution is the left to right. It's the horizontal axis on this whole picture. And that's because of this. Simon Wardley modeled the way the markets work. And what he came up with after studying hundreds and thousands of data points is that generally speaking, it seems like everything is evolving when it's under the influence of capitalism, is the sort of rough way that I say it sometimes, but specifically supply and demand competition. And that stuff matters like anytime there's a scarce resource and anytime there's a benefit to making something better, you'll get competition. You'll get someone out there in the global marketplace trying to make it better. And so you can just think of that as like a constant force in the background, and it affects everything for better or worse. It affects nonprofit contexts. It affects government. It affects obviously business and things like that. So everything is evolving. The work that we do, the technologies we use, the ways of working, our practices, right? Knowledge bases, everything is going through this general change. And when it first comes into existence, a thing is totally uncertain, uncharted, it's unpredictable, it has potential future value, but if it works once, it's a miracle. And then it probably explodes into a giant ball of flame. But when it starts to work twice, and 3 times, and 4 times, and more people start to find that thing valuable, it shifts from this first stage into the second stage. And as more and more people find it valuable, and as the thing itself becomes more certain and well understood, it continues to shift to the right and to the right until finally it reaches the end stage, or the last stage here, where it becomes more industrialized. It's more ordered. There's no mystery to it anymore. And in fact, it's almost invisible because it's such a part of our society. It's such a part of our expectations about what should be here. Think like electricity. You'd be pretty upset if you didn't have electricity right now because you couldn't be on this call. So that's the general flow of things. And just as a case example, like maybe one of the first people thinking about flying machines was Da Vinci, right? I don't think he was ever successful. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But then along came the Wright brothers, and as with many technological innovations, this one got exploited for military purposes. And so you saw a shift from the first flight to the first batch of reproduced airplanes, air machines for reconnaissance purposes during World War One. I think I'm getting the history right on that. Double check me. But I know it was for a military context. And then over time, and as the years passed, eventually we started seeing, well, again, more military application, but then more civilian application. It became interesting to have a plane. And so to fly, you had to have a plane. And then over time, things evolved even further, and they started making bigger planes that could fit more people. And think about what changed as it crossed into the last sort of stage here. You no longer have to have a plane to fly. You have to have a ticket, which buys you a place for a short period of time on a plane. So it's weird how that changed, but you can see, just generally speaking, how things shift over time, and it's gradual. But there are these moments where like there are big jumps, like the shift from having to own a plane to the shift of just having to pay for a ticket. And that's emphasizing everything goes through this. Everything you can think of, for better or worse. I think of this as an incomplete partial list: activities, technologies, practices, knowledge, data, all these things are going through this shift. And it's important to be aware of this, because depending on how evolved it is, it's got different characteristics. And here's a big messy table. Don't let your heads explode. I know when I first saw this, I almost wept because it was just so much to deal with. But this describes the characteristics and qualities of each stage of evolution. And so you can actually kind of reverse engineer where something is in its evolution by seeing which of these kinds of fit. I like to start with failure, which is down here. So in stage 1, failure is assumed, like it's gonna fail, no question, right? Whereas in stage 4, failure is so surprising, like what, it failed? That's impossible, right? Think about when you lose power, for example. It's like, what? This is so wrong. Like, what, this is messed up. So you can use one or more of these characteristics and qualities to sort of reverse engineer which stage something is in. And we'll talk a little bit more about like why that's super useful, but just to sort of demonstrate this a little bit, I'm going to take Jennifer's example real quick. And Tristan, if we have time, I'll bring you in as well. And I'm just going to plop this onto the map here. And we kind of just throw the user, or the person, the people benefiting, the who's, up above the map, because we're not really trying to figure out how evolved they are. They're people. I don't really like doing that to people, right? So down here we have a need, career advancement. And I'm looking at these labels at the bottom: Genesis, custom built product, commodity. And I look at this cheat sheet here, and those match the first row: Genesis, custom, product, commodity. Those don't really mean much to me in terms of career advancement. So I'm going to find a different quality. And Jennifer, I'm going to ask to see which you think kind of fits here. Let's look at, what should we pick? User perception. Here's a good one.
Yeah, I think that is good.
When you think about career advancement for these researchers, do you think they perceive it as confusing, exciting, surprising? Or do you think it's more like standard and expected at this point?
I think it's standard and expected.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I just did was I kind of like got a feel for like the left side or the right side. And now let's like refine a little bit. Would you say that it's just a common thing, and it's disappointing if it's not available? Like it's kind of like I'm really like disappointed if I can't advance my career. Or is it so certain that it's standard and expected, and if I can't advance my career, that doesn't even make sense?
I think where I'm hitching a little bit is on, there is a standard path to get to full professorship and tenure. And it isn't always easy for people to follow that path because that is becoming more and more restricted. There are fewer and fewer opportunities that the institutions are making available for that. So they're trying to push people into assistant professorships. But one of the things they must do if they want to pursue that path is to be published in a reputable journal. So I don't know how to depict that.
That's great. I love what you just pointed out. And so let's play with the failure characteristic next. So we kind of got a feeling that's on the right side. Let's look at failure. Like, do you think failure for these researchers is not tolerated or completely surprising? It's a tough one.
I mean, I guess it's a gate and the gate is getting narrower. And so I don't know that they go into it with an expectation that they will pass the gate. But I think they know that if they want a shot at it, they have to publish reputable research in a reputable publisher.
Yeah. Okay. So what we'll do for now is like, we're just gonna put a pin in this and we're gonna come back to it. And you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna throw it right here, sort of between the two.
In the middle. Okay.
Yeah, why not? I mean,
okay.
There are no rules.
Okay.
Like we can do this because we know we're going to come back to it. We're going to think on it more and we can explore it and make it even more right later, maybe in discussion with a colleague as we compare. And then the research data itself, like if you think about this, where do you think that fits from left to right? And if you had to guess.
It should be a commodity. That's what it's supposed to be. It's when it isn't that there are problems.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. So the research data should be, and as I look over here, it should be totally widespread and stabilizing. It should be commonly understood. Everything that we write about it should be focused on how to use it.
Yeah.
But what you're noticing is that there's a failure sometimes. It sneaks in.
Yep.
Okay. So here's what I'm going to do. Because there are no rules, I'm just going to write on here. This fails sometimes. I'm writing on the map. You can't stop me. Right? So the point of this is to get our thinking out. And look, I'm sure there are some folks on the call who thinks research data belongs in Genesis. And I almost like completely believe that you probably are both thinking about different things and encountering different versions of what this word means. And that would be an amazing conversation to go off and have. Alas, we do not have time. But this is the basic process. You just kind of see where it fits. And then what do we do with it? And sorry, Tristan, I don't quite have time to do another one. I talk a little bit too much sometimes. So we'll maybe do something during the after hours or something like that. But what do you do when you have your map? And just as like a guess, like dealing with doctor data, do you think that's sort of towards the beginning or towards the end, or the left or the right of this whole thing?
I mean, all of this is from the publisher's perspective. And so, I mean, that is actually one of the failures. I think that's the relationship to research data. Sometimes there's a failure in the way that the data is collected or the way that it is transmitted. And sometimes that is intentional and sometimes it is unintentional.
Yeah. So I'm looking at the data part of this. And I like these two in the middle here, divergent versus convergent. Would you say that the ways that you're dealing with doctor data are diverging still?
Yes.
Or are they converging? Okay.
No, not yet.
Okay. I'm just going to throw it in custom built for now. And that way we can kind of move into the next thing. Awesome. Thanks for doing that with me, Jennifer. I really appreciate you.
No, I appreciate the opportunity to figure out how this works. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. So that's like the map making part, and we could spend hours exploring that. But what I want to like point you to next is like, what do you do with it once you have it? And like, there's some basic things that can happen here, right? Basic kind of questions. Are we using the same words when we talk about this thing? Do we even have words for it? Do we need to come up with words? It's hard to make a map if you don't have the words for the things. And sometimes there's like a hole in the map, and it's like there's something goes there and I don't know what it's called. Those are like valid kinds of problems to be exploring and dealing with. And I mean, at the most basic, a strategy conversation should be able to articulate who we intend to serve, what we intend for them to get, and how we expect it to get done. When we make a map, we articulate our theory about that, our opinion, right or wrong. And then that turns into the challenge that needs to occur where we're saying, hey, that's not quite how this works. This is what I need to happen instead. There's a negotiation kind of moment that can happen. And of course, like at this most basic level, you can ask like, hey, what's happening here? And if it's not working for us, what are our options to do? Oh, and what if we tried this? What if we tried that? It's a conversation tool for those purposes. And sometimes you're just having the conversation with yourself. That's okay. It's still helpful. Okay, coming back to this though, Sun Tzu, Art of War, Simon was not content with just making pictures, maps, and I renamed some of his things here, so forgive me for breaking the orthodoxy. But he's not just interested in your purpose, he's not just interested in your maps, but there are these other things that he pulled out of the Art of War which are really useful for us to look for in our work. And those are patterns. So what kinds of things can we generally expect to happen? An example is like Black Friday sales in the United States. We know every year there's a huge hype around November-ish, and they like a lot of vendors start doing deals. That's a pattern that we can anticipate. It doesn't mean that it's always going to happen, but it's something that makes the world seem a little less random. And so Simon identified a bunch of patterns that are useful, and I'll share some in a moment. The other thing he found out of the Art of War was principles, things you should always do. Always do this, never do that. Like, how do you train your organization? How do you get people into, sometimes I like to use a fitness metaphor. It's like you can't do this complicated strategic gameplay if you can't brush your teeth and tie your shoes. So a little bit of that, but in an organizational context, things like, do we even speak the same words to each other when we're talking about what we do and who we serve? So that kind of thing. I'll share more about that in a minute. And then lastly, he also pulled out plays. And I think like when people think about strategy, they get really excited about plays. Ooh, game plays, moves, chess things. Awesome. The plays are kind of like, there's some words I like to use. So stratagems is a word that is useful here, also known as tricks or gambits. These are unique to a situation, and they might only work once. Kind of like if you're playing football or soccer for Americans, a gambit might be to headbutt the ball into the net. But if you do that every single time, everyone's going to figure it out, right? So it might only work once, and so you want to mix things up. Another gambit might be to feint and pass the ball to another teammate who can then kick it into the net, right? These are stratagems, gambits, one-off tricks that may or may not work. And so Simon has identified a bunch of those too. And so you can always make your map better. Like, here's some refinement questions I like to make. Like, it all revolves around the pictures. Like, the pictures are the center of the discussion. Remember the sand table? You're looking at it together, and you're asking, like, what patterns are happening here that help us make the world feel a little less random? What principles should we be applying with respect to this or that? And what are our options? Like, what gambits could we try? What tricks could we use to change the way the world is working in our favor? And if you don't find things, you can make the map more messy, more detailed in order to find more places to look. And that's actually the trick with all this, is that from here, you have so much that you can ask about. So this is more tables of patterns, tables of principles, tables of plays. These are in Simon Wardley's book, which was linked earlier in the chat. And here's the joy of it. I'm not gonna like get too distracted and go down the rabbit hole on each of those. Like, you must memorize all the things in the tables. No, that's not how this works. Before you build intuition and before you build like a sense for how to apply this stuff, you have to get some practice. And so I've written this. This is like my rote way of doing Wardley Map, Wardley mapping. This is like my weird little process. I don't know if it'll help you, but it certainly helped me get from not making maps at all to making maps and building an intuition for how this stuff works. And so I always say start with a small map. Can we name at least one who, one what, and a couple hows? Who's getting value? What are they getting from it? How are they getting it? Like, what are we doing in order to make it happen? Okay, great. You can do that. You can make a value chain by connecting them together. What depends on what else? Can you read it? Does it make sense as a sentence? This depends on that. That depends on this other thing. And then, honestly, stop there for most of you, at least on your first go around. Ask some basic questions. See if you got it right. See if you get benefits from just understanding the situation with the value chain. Okay, great. If you're looking to go deeper and get more out of the process, start looking for patterns. And here's the trick, part by part. Okay, so if we go back to this map, I'm just going to pick dealing with doctored data. That's the only thing I'm thinking about right now, dealing with doctored data in this map. And I'm going to go to my patterns and look, without even talking about what these patterns mean or all this kind of stuff or how to look for them, just know that you can say, okay, given dealing with doctored data, I can ask the question, does this one apply? Does this pattern apply? Does this one apply? Does that make sense? You can go part by part and just ask, like, is this relevant? And think for a moment. And like, yeah, 9 out of 10 are going to be no. But then you'll get one and you'll go, wait a minute, that's really important. And that's how this works for me, at least in the rote sense, just before we go into some of these specific examples. It's like, it's just, okay, part by part, are any of these patterns relevant? You don't have to do all of them. You just can do a few, whatever keeps your energy high, right? Okay, principle by principle, are there any relevant here for this dealing with doctored data thing? Okay, are there any plays here that might be interesting to think about? And like all the while I'm making notes, right? I'm writing on the map, I'm keeping track of things, opportunities to go look into. And then I switch to the next part. And then I repeat it again. And then I switch to the next part and I repeat it again. So it's just a loop of loops. I'm just examining all the patterns, principles, and plays for each part in order to go through this rote kind of way of practicing Wardley maps in order to build intuition about what to look for. And look, the second time you do it, you'll remember things instead of having to look at the table, right? So that's the kind of skill part of this. So let's just like go into like the briefest of examples here on each of these things. Is this legible? Like, can you all read this at all? Okay. Would anyone like to be my random number generator and pick one of the things off this list? Just give me a little wave or speak up.
3 horizontal, 2 vertical.
3 horizontal, 2 vertical. Is that evolution consists of multiple waves? Is that right?
I pick randomly, so
Okay, great. Okay. Evolution consists of multiple ways of diffusion with many chasms. For most of you, that will mean nothing, right? Okay, let me show you the trick about turning this meaning nothing into meaning something. Up here, I have this link, and this just forwards to a reference table on learnwardleymapping.com, and that reference comes from Simon's book. So if you want to go digging, you can find it there as well. So I'm opening that link and I'm scrolling down, scrolling down, scrolling down, scrolling down, table of climatic patterns. Okay, now I'm looking for multiple waves of diffusion with many chasms. All right, so this is not the best interface. I admit it. I built it. I hand coded it with artisanal JavaScript and terrible thoughts. Bear with me here, but this definition is also available in a spreadsheet. It's also in the book. This is something you can read about. And we read here, it's like, okay, evolution consists of many instances of the same act. For example, from one phone to a better phone to an even better phone. Every instance of that act will diffuse through the applicable market. So the Nokia, whatever the fancy brick phone is that people had way back, diffused to all the people who were ever going to buy it. And then the next model came, and the next model came, BlackBerries came, Samsung, all that stuff. And now I'm sitting here with a Google Pixel phone or whatever, and like that's diffusing to its applicable market. That's what it's saying, right? And it happens by stage of evolution too. Like within custom built, it diffuses until it reaches its cap, and then the next model comes. So there's more to learn here. And as Simon writes, the path is not smooth. It's weird. It's not linear. It has many branches and dead ends. Things die, all that kind of stuff. So what I'm trying to impart to you is that when you want to learn about something and apply a pattern, all you have to do is go look it up. And yeah, it's a lot of work. It's like looking up references and things like that. That's the hard part with Wardley mapping. I'm trying to make it easier. But does this make sense? Like, this is the general kind of idea. It's like patterns, principles, and plays. Look at the Wardley map, and for each part, ask if those patterns, principles, and plays are relevant. And your first answer is going to be, I don't know. And you'll have to go learn about the thing and then come back to find the answer. And if I look at evolution consists of multiple waves of diffusions with many chasms, if I go look at Jennifer's map here, dealing with Dr. Data, oh man, I wonder what all the industries are that deal with Dr. Data and how far those things have diffused or haven't diffused outside those industries. Like there's academic publishing. There's got to be other people dealing with Dr. Data. I wonder like what the history is here. How did we get to where we are? Like, and I'm asking like questions that sort of just come to mind. They're not even specifically relevant to the climate pattern necessarily. It's like, what it starts the thinking. It starts the engagement with what's happening here and helps you appreciate different aspects of what's happening. And always looking at the history is really interesting. What's the history of the different practices that diffused and so on around dealing with Dr. Data, even just within the academic publishing field? So you could go on a little history deep dive and ask some people or look at Wikipedia articles and things like that. And then you ask, is that relevant? And you might find out that the answer is no. And then you just pick the next one. And you do this. And honestly, like mapping should be fun. That's my opinion. I think it should be energizing. And so if you get drained from it, like just put it down and come back to it later, right? Pick another pattern. Try principles instead of patterns. Try looking at plays instead of principles or patterns. Like if they're fun, if it's interesting, that's what's going to build the energy so that you practice and you explore and you learn. All right, I suspect I need to start wrapping things up because it's about 1 minute till the hour. So I am going to send you through after this call, the recording, the slides, all these kind of interesting links. So keep an eye on your inbox for that. I just wanted to point out that there's a lot of applications for Wardley mapping. So I talked a little about who you all might be earlier in the call. Here's some different places you might use it. Like I noticed one of you mentioned that you're looking for a job. Wardley mapping can absolutely help with that. I used it to change like how I applied to jobs way back in the day. I used it to model myself and make sense of what I need from a job. Kelsey Hightower, who I think was really well known in the Kubernetes community, used it to change careers. He mapped an industry and said, I want to work at the ones that are working here because those will always be around and they'll always probably be performing really well. So it's absolutely useful at the person scale. It can also work at the organization scale, like what's going on inside our company. Sometimes it's super messy, lots of different ways of applying it there. And at the market scale, like how do we compete? Where are we going to play? How are we going to win, to borrow Roger Martin? Competitor intelligence is a fun one too, like how to learn from others even when you can't see inside their company, but you can only see the blog posts and things like that that they write. So a little bit about that. And I'm going to wrap this up with a quick request, and then we'll do some after hours discussions. So I'll end the recording and then we'll do just some chatting back and forth if you want to stay late for that. But as a reminder, David and I love working with folks on market or internal challenges. So please feel welcome to reach out to us if you'd like to talk about that, or even if you just have questions about Wardley mapping, always happy to help. The other thing is I have a weird idea. I want to try something. I want to try something called a Wardley Map roast. And I actually don't mean a roast. I couldn't roast you if I tried. That would hurt me too much. I want to offer sort of a test of a critique service, let's say, where if you send me a map and you answer some questions about like what the map's about and why it matters and maybe define some of the terms, I could sit down and read through the map, tell you what I see, tell you what I notice, problems that I think you might be missing in the way that you structured your map, questions I'd ask in order to dig into it more, or even just like things that are obvious to me, like, oh, you could do this then. And it's going to be naive, right? Because I don't know your situation, but I wonder if this would be useful or interesting to people. So I want to do some tests around this, and if you want to join me for that, I would ask that you sign up at lwm.events/roast, and this will just add you to my mailing list. If you're already on the mailing list, it'll add a little thing for me to make sure that I send you anything I am going to do with this test. So if you want to play with me on this kind of test, just sign up there, and we'll do that. All right, so I'm going to wrap up today. I really want to thank you for your time and attention and for hanging out with me. I really appreciate you. Remember that we have this networking post situation, right? So you can network with each other, talk about your challenges at lwm.events/network. It'll take you to this post and you can find each other there. So be sure to do that. Thanks for spending time with me. And what I'm going to do next is end the screen share and the recording. And if you want to do a little bit of after hours conversation, we can shift straight into sort of like questions you have, things you noticed, anything that would be helpful to you. And if you have to leave, that's okay too. I appreciate you being here. Take care and have a lovely day.